Hey, good afternoon, good morning, good evening, depending on where you are on this fast forward planet and on the internet, which is where we are right now. I'm really pleased you could join me. Please share this with others in a few minutes. This is kind of a pop up version of my Thriving Online project, which is apparently not going to LinkedIn today for some particular reason. I don't know. This is what happens sometimes on the internet. My name is Andy Revkin, and I am at the Earth Institute at Columbia University. I've been navigating the online environment since, I was a New York Times reporter for a long time in print, and I started to experience the complexities and wonders of online impact when I created a blog in 2007 at the New York Times. Here at Columbia University, I'm trying to engage others in ways to have impact online. And so after I'd started this Sustain What webcast series back in March on COVID-19 and how do we build resilience, I decided to make Mondays about particular tools and tactics that can make a difference. And today I'm going to take you through my own learning journey as it relates to something I've called a BackTrack Journal, which I've been testing, evolving and testing for a while. So I'm going to show you what that looks like here. And you can see this is the opening slide, but I'm going to take you to Twitter where I posted a string that I'm going to use as the template for this today. Twitter can be a PowerPoint if you want it to be. So for me, this concept, this idea of tracking back to the information that we experience online started in a funny way. There was a book by David Owen, who was at The New Yorker, that had this really intriguing, the book is a really cool book. It's on energy and efficiency and how innovation can kick back and create more and more and more of the stuff that we think it's very cool about creating less need for. So in this book, he had this illustration, this set of images, which were a Tallahassee transportation department illustration of the benefits of mass transit. And you can see here, well, look, that same number of people in driving individual cars, if they were sitting in a bus, and you can see there, obviously, the invisible imaginary bus, wouldn't it be great if you can see how that affects traffic patterns? It's really cool. So I went on Google and I started to poke around to see, well, where'd that come from? It wasn't really clear in the book beyond just being a page in a book. And I poked around, and then I started stumbling on things like this, and I was, well, that's interesting. This is super cool. This is the same thing that was in David Owen's book, but it's dynamic and animated. It's basically an infographic. It's an infographic, it's data. How many people in different circumstances take up how much space? And that, again, kind of got me excited. I thought, well, where did that come from? On the internet, you'll stumble on all kinds of imagery and the like, and you're not quite sure of the provenance of it. And so I used Google image search, and that was my path towards starting to understand more quickly where that came from. So again, this is all part of my notion of, this became an exercise when I was teaching students at Pace University and here at Columbia, ultimately, when I'm in classrooms here, to develop this sort of basic capacity to stop and think before you retweet or before, like, where did that come from? Where did it originate? Any of those of you who are photojournalists will know that quite often photos will make the rounds without any attribution. So that's one issue. But this is more about innovation. Like, how did this come around? Who? So when I saw this, I started poking and using Twitter to say, well, where did this come from? And that became an interesting thread as well. It took actually some weeks and months. But when I was posting on that, an old friend from journalism days, Lloyd Alter, had said it's Toronto. So I finally knew where it was from. It was the Toronto Transit Commission had commissioned this animation to make the point about the value of public transportation. TTC Helps is now their current Twitter ID. which is not, I don't think it existed at that time. So I kept poking, and then later, after I wrote about this more, someone, Bazzargh, noted, well, way back in 1991, in Munster, Germany, there was a series of photographs taken to illustrate the same point. So here, basically, I'm talking about using this tool, using what I call a BackTrack Journal, using that having the motivation to take yourself back through, well, where did this come from? Having that reflex to say, where did this come from before you tweet or post, to me is useful in many ways. And then, of course, you can also say, where do we go from here? Quite often in my tweeting and my other work, I'm trying to stimulate new ideas. Well, what can we do with the same concept as a visualization tool to take things forward? Here I want to talk to you a little bit about an aspect of this BackTrack Journal concept that long predates the modern internet, meaning the social media landscape we now rely on so much. And I've been thinking about this quite often. There are a host of sleuths poking back along communication chains to reveal the dark side use and abuse of our online environment. There's tons of tools. There's tons of people working really, especially right now with the infodemic raging, to kind of say, well, where did that come from? And here's who actually did it. And here's their malicious purpose. There's First Draft News. There's Renee DiResta at the Stanford Internet Observatory, No Upside. There's The Factual, which I recently did a conversation with the folks who created that, the Factual News at. Snopes, of course, University of Washington Center for an Informed Public, which is a great place. But I wanted to take you through a case study that goes really way further back. In 1991, I was writing a book about global warming. It was my first global warming book. I'd written one on the Amazon rainforest, and here was this book on global warming, which had a lot of the same stuff you've seen ever since that we've had in countless books and the like. And there was a line in it that I love so much that I put it into a call out in the book. This was the book. Actually, you can get it on Amazon.com for like $2, free shipping. I don't get a penny from it, of course. It's long out of date, long out of use. But I had this call out about Svante Arrhenius, who was, as any of you dug in on climate history knows that in the 1890s there was a Swedish chemist who really nailed the basic concept of greenhouse forcing from coal burning. In other words, more coal would release more CO2 and change the world's climate. He actually foresaw that as a beneficial thing, maybe because he was Swedish. So the book had this, it was a beautiful illustrated book. And you can see here, whoops, let me get this right. I had this quote, "We are evaporating our coal mines into the air." You know, that's a powerful, evocative concept. So that's why it got play. Now, the book didn't really do much business. It came and went. We were in the Persian Gulf War. Other things were happening. And around 2003, I got this email. Pretty sure it was an email. It might have been a phone call from a fellow at the University of Rhode Island, an oceanographer, Michael Pilson, who said, "Where'd you get that quote?" He said, "I've been digging in on the literature around Arrhenius, and I just haven't found it." In fact, he had affirmatively pretty much nailed that it didn't exist. So, and I was originally kind of defensive about this. You know, I had gotten it from a source. I'd put it in the book. The last thing I wanted to think about was if it wasn't true. But it was, and he convinced me it was. If you look at the online version of Global Warming book, I have a little addendum there now about this. And it's kind of interesting how this played out. As you can see here, I actually realized, and this is a big mea culpa, that I hadn't fully researched where that quote came from. A longtime friend, Jonathan Weiner, who teaches at the journalism school here now, had written a book on a little bit earlier, maybe it was 1989 or so, on called The Next 100 Years. Yeah, 1990. And that quote I had derived from that book without double checking the provenance of the quote. So here again, this is that BackTrack Journal notion of if you're going to convey a fact, it's good to know where it came from. If you want to see the roots of an innovative idea, visualization, like that, those great, like this, thinking more about, well, where did it come from can lead to more questions about how do we take that forward? How do we make this even better? What can we do differently to create a bigger landscape of opportunity of communication innovation? I've tweeted this many, many times just to kind of pull us forward and say, well, this is, again, information in motion. And what can we do that can take this concept and do even better? So, as I said, my learning experience with writing that book and later having what I thought was a firm fact, a wonderful nugget from Svante Arrhenius, turned out to be incorrect. I learned that's a good lesson. It's good to get those lessons, to integrate them, to then turn them to your advantage by making it into a practice, to be have a little bit more due diligence in when you're assembling a story or writing or tweeting. So here's the paper that was published by Michael Pilson, who's now emeritus at University of Rhode Island. He's retired. But this is really interesting to read now, what he said here. The title sentence, meaning this quote, was not written by Svante Arrhenius. Furthermore, the context within which he was working would not have led naturally to the creation of such a sentence. The sentence was the work of 4 separate individuals. This shows you how a mythology can evolve, can iterate. Lotka introduced the word evaporating in a paragraph where he was discussing Arrhenius's views as presented in 1908. Jesse Ausubel, who's another friend of mine, Rockefeller University, copied a sentence from Lotka, still with only the word evaporating in quotation marks, but without a qualifying phrase, in a paragraph where he was discussing Arrhenius's contributions, probably believing that the word was from Arrhenius. Roger Revelle, who, again, anyone knowing the history of climate change concern knows about Roger, who I got to interview a couple times in the 80s. So Revelle included the whole fragment of a sentence from Ausubel, probably believing that this fragment was from Arrhenius. So you have this jumping, hopscotching process, along with 9 direct quotations from Arrhenius, not saying exactly where they came from. Jonathan Weiner added the first 2 words and ascribed the whole sentence to Arrhenius. Subsequent authors, yours truly, have sequentially quoted each other, generally without attribution. And that is a process and a practice. So the practice there feels prickly, and for any author, it's a hard thing to go back and examine your practices and understand what you might do better going forward. And I was in touch with Michael off and on when this paper came through. And I see this as, again, a way forward. So I also did this piece on Medium that gets into some more of the details about how you would have this BackTrack Journal construct, how you codify it, whether it's just an informal practice of yours or whether it's in your teaching or the like. How do you think about making that more of a norm when you're looking at information flowing across your screen? I'm going to pause for a second to see if there's any comments coming in. And I'm going to offer something up on Twitter. You can come join me here in the video part of this. And let's see here. I'll post this on YouTube, on Facebook too. So hold on one second. And around that tweet, you'll see an invitation to enter the video chat with me. We'll see how that goes. Kind of a fun concept itself. Hold on a second. If you have any questions, comments, post them in the little box, and I can deal with them. So hold on. And on Twitter, I'm going to do something in a second. Give me one more second. So again, this is a little chat on BackTrack journaling. Here we go. everybody. Thanks, Deborah. I'll post this on Facebook so you can enter too if you want. Okay, it's on Twitter. I'm going to retweet it just to be sure people find it. So let me go to Facebook. Deborah, if you have a question, fire away. I'm actually going to go to the Medium post because then we can walk through some of the things that are there as well. The whole idea is to develop a toolkit and tactics for seeking reality facing this infodemic. And BackTrack Journal is just one of the ways we can do this. There was another example. And then, of course, there is... Oh, of course, I have to change this. Hold on one more second. Stay with me, everybody. This is always a work in progress here, and I'm glad you're part of it. But I have to do one more thing. From tab, Medium. Okay, here we go. So my friends Carl Bergstrom and Jevin West have a book out and also a course they teach online over at University of Washington called Calling Bullshit. And that's more about data. How do you not get fooled by data? How do you use data more effectively? I'll post this actually in the chat box here too. People will have to write down the link because I don't think you get it as text. But there you go. So if you see that on Facebook, you can actually pop in and say hi. Let's see if anyone does. Be kind of fun. Let me just go to Facebook and I will post it there too. And just be patient for a second. Share in a group, share now. Share, here we go. If you have questions or time, and time. Okay. So if you're on Facebook, you can check out what I'm doing over there and come on in and say hi. So there's lots of these tools and tactics online. This is a particularly great one. They have an open curriculum. You can see here, Introduction to Bullshit, Spotting Bullshit, the natural ecology of bullshit, meaning that's the part I'm interested in too, where things emerge and come from and go to. There's statistical traps, visualizations, big data, publication bias, predatory publishing and scientific misconduct, the ethics of calling bullshit, fake news. And actually, I'm going to do one other thing. I forgot. I put up the banner. So if you have questions, you want to email me later, you can also, you'll find in that scrolling banner down below some information on what to do. Here's the fine art of baloney detection, which of course came from Carl Sagan way, way back. And you can see he's quoting Francis Bacon from 1620. The human understanding is no dry light, but receives an infusion from the will and affections, whence proceed sciences, which may be called sciences as one would. For what a man had rather were true, he more readily believes. That line is the key line. What a man or woman would rather have true, he more readily believes. That's what we call now confirmation bias, written in 1620. Therefore, he rejects difficult things from impatience of research, sober things because they narrow hope, the deeper things of nature from superstition, the light of experience from arrogance and pride, etc., etc. So confirmation bias itself is something that has deep roots, the understanding thereof. Let me go back up to the top here because I want to get back to the main concept. So BackTrack Journal essentially is a process for testing what's flowing by you and getting at least a sense of where it came from before you send it on its way to someone else. And this post I did on Medium, Tools and Tactics for Seeking Reality Facing an Infodemic, BackTrack Journal, is one way to learn more about what I've been trying to convey. I also did a I also wrote a piece for .earth, my blog, that similarly gets into this, and I want to show you. That's where I really do lay out the concept and describe it in more detail. Let me just go to that link, and you can learn more. So hold on, I've got to change one other thing here, or you'll be seeing the wrong thing in your screens. Okay. So, .earth, the blog I wrote at the New York Times, even while I was a reporter, I set out the basics of this concept, and I'll just take you down through them here. So here's the key thing, just once in a while, doesn't have to be every day or every week even, but this I used to tell my students. This was when I was teaching at Pace University, but it's just as true now, just as valuable now to keep this in mind. When something crosses your screen, something that you see as consequential or aggravating or validating you, do that little Dan Kahneman thing, the thinking fast and slow author. Step back from your own thinking briefly and take a breath and say, well, how do I know this? How do I know this is true? As I say here, where did you see it first? Who or what brought it to your attention? Who created it? Also try to compile links from the original content. This was as an assignment. You don't have to do this. I'm just hoping to again, propagate the practice, not the, this is not an assignment for you necessarily. So as I said, here's one of my BackTrack journals, which I think illustrates some of the value in trying to trace how the web and social networks move information around and often obscure the origins of content. And I think that can be a problem both for good content and bad content. I'm just going to repeat here a little bit for those who are now watching. My first real effort at this came when I was reading a book by David Owen from The New Yorker. His book, The Conundrum, had this cool illustration showing in a very simple way how much less space is taken up by people when they're not in cars. And it was about mass transportation. And I thought that was so fascinating, I began to poke around online. So from the printed book, I began to look around for where that might have come from. And as I said earlier, I got immersed in a much more interesting arena of animated versions of that. So here was this great example of the same approach to essentially data visualization, but very dynamic. And that led me further and further back. Lloyd Alter helped me find out where that came from. And it went down all the way back to 1991, where in Munster, Germany, this had been an illustration with the same thing in mind. So that struck me as something a practice worth propagating. So I began to do that through my students. And now I'm doing it through this Thriving Online webinar, which on Mondays is devoted to fairly practical ways to make a difference online, if you can, if you care to. The big thing here always still is having the motivation. We're stuck, as that quote from Francis Bacon said, we're stuck with our predispositions, our instincts, our reflexes are all to embrace the thing that validates us, not necessarily the thing that challenges us. And that's a reflex that in the current infodemic, it would be great to find ways to avoid. So Deborah Freeman has a great question here. How do you balance fact-checking efforts? Although Google allows many search results quickly, some sources like .gov have become less reliable. 2, hoping you post this presentation references somewhere. 3, P.S. trying to track the amount of global plastic production as a percent of production from fossil fuels, carbon load that contribute to global warming to explain to kids. Wish me luck. I wish you luck, Deborah. And I'll try to round up some resources for you. I will post the link here, BackTrack Journal. I'll show you right now the, right there, j.mp/BackTrack Journal goes to the Medium essay I wrote. And the Medium essay has a link to the New York Times piece that I wrote as well. So those are ways to figure that out. Now, going back to Deborah's question, well, one of the things I encourage young folks to think about doing once in a while along these lines is to look at the difference between a Google search and a Google Scholar search. So I'll just type in, I don't know, global warming, Paris Agreement. It's pretty random. So we have a couple of stories there. Not a lot of content. NASA. And one of the original old papers. That's cool. And let's just try it in Google Scholar. And you can do, of course, the time. You can choose a time span. You can you don't need patents or citations. So Google Scholar gets you a step closer to the roots of things. Now, obviously, Google Scholar is not the end of the road. It's just a way to winnow and get a little more clarity on where something might have come from, mostly from peer-reviewed publications, not all. So that's one way, Deborah, that you might think about. Just doing that exercise alone can be a useful thing to try. I'm going to switch the screen again. Hold on a second. I'm going to go back to Twitter so we can explore some things in real time. One more second. So now we're on Twitter. And again, here, I'm going to go back to the top of this post and then show you yeah, let's go back here. Ah, someone's coming on. Hold on one second. Laura Reed.
Yes. Hello.
Laura, you're very backlit.
I'm sorry. I'm going to close my shade. I
That's
have.
Okay.
Okay. Excuse me. Yeah.
No, this is great. Oh, that's good.
Okay. Excuse me.
So thanks for joining me. And where are you? And who are you? What brought you here?
So I'm at UMass Amherst, and I am a researcher, scholar, activist, and I am really interested in checking in about what your work is.
Well, the key thing for me right now is establishing this initiative here at Columbia at the Earth Institute.
Yeah.
You know, I'm a journalist, right, for 35 years, but I'm not at the journalism school. I work with the journalism school on some projects we're trying to do, but I'm creating a new initiative at the Earth Institute, which is a sustainability hub, very focused on climate, disaster risk reduction, aspects of it on COVID-19 and pandemics and biology. Because I kind of got convinced in my journalism at a certain point that what we're seeing right now is an emergence of a new aspect of the Earth system. Like Earth has oceans and climate and seismic activity, and now it has the information environment. It's like a thing. It's like a feature of the Earth system.
Yeah.
And there are people exploring it, but I want to basically test drive it. Like, what can I do to propagate, as I was just saying today? Are there practices I can help amplify, point to, or develop here that can foster a little bit more of a landscape? And not just like, we're not going to always be fact-based. We're mostly not going to be fact-based, but we at least have to know that as we navigate.
Critical inquiry.
There you go. But taking it to the root, you know, being there was an environmental leader in Brazil a long time ago, Jose Lutzenberger, who stressed to me, it was the first time as I learned this back in 1989, he was saying, radical means the root. The Latin root of radical is root. So it's not, radical isn't like, burning buildings and being weird. Radical is getting to the very deep principles behind things. So for me, again, as a journalist, I was sort of oblivious to so many aspects of the way information moves for so long that I felt, oh my God, I got to figure this out. And so that's kind of what I'm pursuing.
Excellent.
I'd like to hear more about your work too. So tell me.
Well, so I'm a longstanding academic. I've been working on nuclear issues, disarmament, activism, teaching since the 1980s. But I am now teaching an honors capstone course at UMass Amherst that unfortunately is remote, but it is a senior honors thesis that is looking at it's called bioterrorism, interdisciplinary perspectives, but really it's all about the transformation of these technologies and looking at new norms and systems for how we address challenges, the most minute and global. But really it's about scholarship and training the next generation to address ongoing concerns that they have, but in a scholarly, academic, and rigorous way.
Is that undergraduate, graduate?
Yes, undergrad. It's
Oh,
like we like to think it's like a master's, but it's seniors doing an honors thesis. Yeah.
that's so interesting.
And I had phenomenal students this past year. And now the reason I tuned into you is that it's going to be remote. And I'm, oh my goodness, I really want to make this rigorous. So I thought I could count on you to help me figure out how to do this.
Yeah, well, let's talk that through a little bit. So what's like, well, what's the outcome that you hope for?
Well, first of all, I have followed your work, in terms of news, and full disclosure, I have, been involved with, not involved, but my partner was a journalist, is a journalist. His name is Seth Schulman, and I have followed a lot of things, but I think of myself as a scholar. But it's a very hard time right now trying to get young people to understand how you think of like the biggest systemic stuff and the kind of specific pieces that you can do good scholarship from an article to a thesis to
Right.
something that's research. So that's why I was hoping to check in with you.
Yeah, well, one of the courses, I don't know if you've already set things up, but one of the most engaging designs I've seen for a course like that was Richard Muller
Oh, right.
at Berkeley, who created a course called Physics for Future Presidents.
Yeah.
Let me, I'll
Yeah.
pull it up. And
Yeah.
it starts with a scenario. I'll pull it up on screen so
Okay,
people can
perfect.
see it. He wrote a book called Physics for Future Presidents. He also did a book, Energy for Future Presidents.
Yeah.
And let's just see what's the best thing to pull up here for a link. Oh, here we go. It's very retro. It's kind of funny. Give me a second.
No worries.
And so, like, for example, I'm pretty sure that one of the segments starts with a dirty bomb going off in Times Square.
Well, that's what
And
I did. That's so 2000. This is what I've been teaching.
oh well, I know,
I know
but
they love the fear and the 24/7 drama, but I'm trying to be kind of well, it's no longer clearly. So again, my course historically had terrorism and dangers, but that just doesn't make sense right now as you're trying to explore these challenges. Oh, interesting.
so anyway, if you want to, it's the
Yeah.
architecture of the course more than the content that
Yeah.
I find interesting.
Okay.
And
Cool.
so we've been doing like on here on this webcast, the midweek ones are more about the tough policy questions. They're not
Yeah.
sort of how do you tweet better, and
Yeah. No. This is totally about the tough policy questions and evidence-based, good research, and a persuasive argument about how you address these challenges in light of what used to be thought of as kind of organized institutional interests that would get in the way, but now we have kind of chaos. But
oh, I know. Well, the other format that can work, and I'm sure you've probably done stuff like this before. When I was still at the New York Times,
mhm.
the education program they developed
Yeah,
there,
yeah,
it's like School of the New York Times.
yeah, yeah,
I designed a course called Sustain What, and this is
ah,
for pre-college. This is pre-collegiate students, so
yeah,
they're like seniors in high
yeah,
school.
yeah, yeah,
And but it was scenario based, and the students had to role play. So it's really
yeah,
role playing,
yeah, yeah,
and
yeah,
that's where on a bioterrorism or where what's going to happen with CRISPR, or
Right. I'm really good with that. I get them to do those things. But then after I get them all scared and realizing, okay, we've done the scenarios. So right now I, have a student who, because he had COVID, I don't want to disclose, but the thing is he's handing in his thesis and he's looking at the H5N1 and, researchers are doing this research. Is it dangerous? Should it be open, transparent? Is it secure? How do we evaluate it? And most importantly, you want to advance the research, but you want to protect public safety.
right.
So this is the piece that I'm trying to get my students to think about. So they are motivated. They're totally motivated. They care about these issues. It's just how to move it forward.
Yeah, I still come back to driving questions. Like,
Yeah.
even in the context of COVID-19, one thing I was thinking about early on was hospital capacity, right?
Mm-hmm.
And there was if we go back to Twitter, I could show you, there was, someone had posted a really good chart about how many hospital beds per 1,000 people
Uh-huh.
exist in different parts of the world. And
Yeah.
Japan has, I think it was like 9 hospital beds per 1,000 people. We have about
Yeah. Yeah.
2.8.
Yeah. Yeah.
So the driving question for me, would be how many hospital beds per 1,000 people is the right number?
Right.
And there is no
Well,
science-based answer.
right.
So the
Right.
learning is that the things that are delineated by science are often not solved by science. Japan has a very different culture. It has
Yeah.
an older population. There's a more acceptance of social norms and a different economy and obviously a different healthcare system. So, but if you're asking the question, how many hospital beds is the right number?
Yeah.
It gets students oriented toward,
Right.
or anybody, the public, I think, oriented toward how to get around the charged, divisive yes/no framings that we use so often that don't really get you anywhere.
Yeah.
You know, I.
Yeah.
So what I hope in my in what I'm doing is in teaching and or here on publicly is sort of not so much conveying facts, which is what I did so long as a journalist or tried. It's like, what are the capacities? What are the ways to shape a conversation? What are the ways to shape a question, like that one,
Well,
that
if I may,
reveal
yeah.
so
Well, I
anyway.
had a fabulous student. Again, it's the problem is you have the public health frame, and I have these fabulous students that look at PPEs. They take the case study of Ebola, figure out learning, and kind of you have both capacity building, but then you have to take into account cultural practices, training local caretakers, and things like that. And that's not about the total number, of capacity, but kind of how you handle it. And try to amplify in a positive way to get better health outcomes.
Right. So more the communication part.
Right.
Well,
Right. So it's both evidence-based, but it's also being culturally sensitive and kind of training people to deal with
right.
what they have and improve upon it. But it's evidence-based.
Yeah. Well, that's I did there's some earlier webcasts I did that are on pathways to communication impact that
Yeah.
have all those qualities. So if it's more about the communication end, like how does
Yeah.
a student in the public sphere
Yeah.
generate data driven communication impact
Yeah.
and do it safely and culturally appropriately and not there's a lot of learning that goes into doing that correctly.
Right.
And my students, when I was teaching at Pace, when I was there in 2010 to 2016, the course I developed was called Blogging a Better Planet.
Yeah.
And people think of blogging as writing a post, right?
Right.
Like all the posts I did on .earth.
Yeah.
But to me, we started out with training wheels, which was social media.
Yeah.
Meaning, just get on whatever social media platform you're already on. Let's test it out. Use that as your blog per se. Meaning, to me, tweeting and blogging are just a matter of sort of scope and depth. It's how do you present a conversation? How do you enter a conversation online in ways that are productive and not just getting into those old, yes, no, brittle modes. And so they start on Twitter, and they did this BackTrack Journal exercise. They spend every week they had to also do a report on what was out there on the internet related to questions they were focused on that either drove them crazy or that they thought was great. So what are some great examples and bad examples? And then we would discuss those in class.
Mhm.
So again, depending on the focus, the themes you're focusing on, you could have
Yeah.
students just diving into what they're seeing online and critiquing it and
So
engaging with
if
that.
you,
And then you step toward assembling a post,
right,
or maybe you'd start with a Twitter thread as a,
yeah.
which is basically like a blog post or an article. And
But if you'll forgive me, my thing is, okay, this is literally a different generation in that what you're saying is online. I'm forcing them go to referee journals, go to PubMed, go to our reference librarian and kind of figure out, know your sources. So it's trying to get them not just to do a Google search. And I just had this in terms of the Boolean search, like what your Boolean search is. And it's like, yeah, that's fine, but you need to critically evaluate that and figure out how to narrow it down so that you get the right sources. And then you blog on it and you debate it. And, you get to different points of view in terms of,
yeah.
and so that's where it's,
Where do you get the data?
well, that's what's both exciting for me, but also something that I took for granted. And yet this next generation doesn't have that same ancient background that we do.
Right. Well, this is, I think, early days for what you're talking about. And we just did a session a week ago with, I'll show you something here. Folks who are doing this. Okay. So Earthrise Education
Yeah.
is an entity created by a guy named Dan Hammer, who used to be in the White House and State Department. Our platform uses collaborative mapping and satellite imagery to support
Right.
real-world investigations.
Right.
So what they've done
Cool.
is created an exchange. It's sort of like a Match.com.
Yeah.
The potential is there to have this be a Match.com. So students studying X.
Yeah.
This is mostly, deforestation or
Right.
roads going into
Right.
Indian Reserve.
Yeah. Yeah.
But what's needed is what you're talking about, which is more of a general data interactivity connector for academic projects. And
So may I ask, so
does that sound right? Does
I-
that sound
yes,
like more
absolutely.
like what
And
you're
this is
looking
a
for?
perfect example where the idea of surveillance, you really want to have surveillance of really very quick information and then a response so that we can kind of do this. But there is such a negative connotation and suspicion about this idea of surveillance. So how do we get undergrads to, of course, use this and say, okay, we need to do this. We need to look at deforestation. We need to know this. At the same time, be skeptical about what are the uses, what are the moneyed interests that are promoting this stuff that at times is kind of expensive.
Right. Well, there's a big batch of, well, I shouldn't say big. There are a bunch of people in the data arena who are trying to use open source data particularly.
Yeah. Oh, we're big on that. Yes. That's what I'm supposed to do. Yes. Yes.
In ways that can be interrogated to reveal problems or opportunities.
Yeah.
So Global Fishing Watch, which I wrote about for the New York Times,
Yeah.
it's surveillance. This is surveillance. It's surveillance of the global oceans,
Yeah.
where there's never going to be enough ships to track down illegal fishing. But
Right.
a guy at Google, a number of years ago,
Yeah.
realized that Oceana,
Yeah.
a marine conservation group, was spending all these person hours
Yeah.
sifting ship track data to see where the illegal fishing was. And they said,
Yeah.
well, there's an algorithm for that.
Oh, it's fabulous. Yeah, the illicit trafficking in the South China Sea with North Korea, this is fabulous because you can actually track it through open source. Yeah. Huh.
So, and there are many, many examples like that. In fact, the Earthrise Education is similar with satellite imagery.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, when you think historically, like you're younger than I am. When I was growing up, yeah, it was all the CIA and
Yeah.
the like. But now there are these satellites. Oh, I'll have to show you a clip that I really think makes the point.
Oh.
There are satellites. They're private. They're non-governmental.
Yeah.
So here, and they're dispatchable. Like this is a satellite tracking day to day
Yeah.
development in the Amazon in a legal area.
Yeah.
And Andrew Zolli, who's there, Zolli,
Oh.
he's at Planet Labs,
Oh.
planet.com. and they're making a big chunk of their data available
Yeah.
publicly. So this is
Yeah.
like what Dan Hammer
Yeah.
and Andrew Zolli,
Yeah.
they're trying to put as
Yeah.
much as they can in the public arena. Like look right there. That's just, you've probably seen that image there. That's the an Indian reserve in the Amazon, the
Sorry.
Xingu.
It
And
makes
look at the
me laugh.
deforestation,
Yeah.
which stops at the borders. So that says, wow, when indigenous
Right.
peoples in the Amazon have land rights,
Right.
that has
Right.
conservation value. Not only does
Right.
it help them sustain themselves.
That's exciting. So it's again, how can we build upon this so that, again, like the librarian in me, like we can use these types of vetted sources and then, have serious researchers not have to reinvent the wheel, but actually use it and then do, value added research.
Well, I think this is something that we should work on. We had a session
Oh,
here also with a guy at the Atlantic Council,
right.
which they have this new geotech initiative. I'm trying to think of the easiest way to find it. Hold on a
I'm really
second.
impressed. You're putting me to shame. I'm realizing this fall I'm going to have to do all this as quickly as you're doing. So I'm very impressed.
Well, you don't have to wait till the fall.
Yeah,
We can, maybe I can help you between now and then, or we can
that'd be
do a,
wonderful. Yeah.
yeah. So here, this was a session we did recently here with the folks at, whoops. Oh, right, there we go. Sorry. I just want to show you the, where is it here? Da, 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 da. Yeah, so we did a session on this question: can we build an immune system for the planet?
Yeah.
Which is really
Yeah.
all it is open data,
Yeah.
transparency,
Yeah.
access for inquiry,
Yeah.
and in this case, this is more like also AI, I mean machine
Yeah.
intelligence,
Yeah.
and on that front, there's some very active work at Columbia this summer. There's a guy at the School of Social Work, Desmond Patton, who's running a summer program in AI for all. Like we think of artificial intelligence,
Yeah.
mostly it's corporations trying to get the jump on the orange crop. Using data, can we make some money incrementally in our hedge funds by knowing a little bit better what's happening with oranges? That's the brunt of AI and or military or like. But this AI for all is about looking at racial inequity, using these tools to interrogate data in ways that reveal problems. At ProPublica,
Mhm.
where I worked, they were doing amazing things with data
Oh, it's
that
yeah.
that
Yeah.
curriculum can be built around too. That was
Yeah.
like racial inequity and the car insurance rates.
Yeah.
All there's so many ways to interrogate data.
Yeah.
So I think what you're pointing to is the need for a community, an active community focused on
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
arena. And I think it's there. It just has to be.
And the mentoring piece. So I have these people that have a great idea, but it's how to make it so that it turns into a good research project when they come up with a valuable thesis.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah. So here's
Oh,
here's Desmond Patton. He's here at Columbia at the School of Social Work,
yeah.
and he does a lot of work with assessing social media and gang use in social media.
Mhm.
He's a brilliant young man, and here's this AI for all
Okay.
project, so
Okay.
that's easy to search for.
I will totally follow up. Yeah, yeah. Excellent.
And again, so this is like, you're right. It shouldn't take me fast Googling to have a go-to place for this. Although in the end, I will say, in a way, I used to think there should be a go-to place. Like there should be like a academic shared curriculum where all these universities have a hub where you put in good stuff and you take out whatever you need to teach with. And then I increasingly I was realizing it's really just a capacity.
Yeah.
Maybe there doesn't need to be an organized thing. Although I think it doesn't hurt to have that either. Like Wikipedia, but with the tools around it so that you can.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah.
So this is great. I'm really glad you could connect here. I'm totally eager to follow up with you.
Okay,
And
excellent.
you're not, by the way, you're not the only professor and teacher who's scrambling ahead of the fall to think, well, how do we keep our students engaged? You know, presuming we'll be online a lot still in the fall. How does
Yeah,
that happen?
yeah.
And I think this model that the Earthrise model I mentioned, Econohammer. I'll just go back to some tweets I did about it because I think they're a good starting place. I think I even, yeah. Give me 1 second to see if
No,
I sift
no.
through this.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
See, can I just
Oh,
say,
here we go. Yeah, here, let me just show
kind of
you
like
this.
the latest thing versus the most, you have this problem of like the latest, most recent comes to the front versus, the best source that might be a few years old, but it's kind of something that you want them to build upon, at least have as their basis.
Yeah, well, I just think they should start to work with any data set and then
Right,
critically
right. Yeah,
critically examine it
yeah,
and say, wow, well, is there a better one? And then use social media to say, hey, is there a better one?
right.
And for professors to facilitate that a little bit,
Yeah.
perhaps depending on the level of
Oh,
students.
no, this is great. This is fabulous. Yeah.
This tweet really got at it. Educators everywhere are girding for sustained remote learning challenges,
Oh,
even
good.
with partial school openings.
Yeah.
Here, a teacher, a technologist, and an astronaut lay out how students in Iowa and Massachusetts helped sift satellite data to identify gold mining in the Yanomami territory in the Amazon,
Yeah.
and that resulted in a Reuters article too. So
Yeah. Yeah.
it is in the end a systems or an ecosystem
Yeah. Oh, that really
capacity.
is exciting. This is fabulous. Yeah.
And let me just see,
Yeah.
Stephen Lee. There's a I'll leave if you can hang in there just for a second. Let's see what this question is. Maybe you could help address it. Ooh, sorry, we're invisible. In addition to confirmation, this is about the biases I mentioned earlier.
Ah, yeah.
In addition to confirmation bias, there are other biases which are threats to the validity of data and discourse. Two that come to mind are cognitive closure and binary thinking. Cognitive closure is the tendency to be intolerant of ambiguity or incongruity. That's definitely out there. We all hate uncertainty. And binary thinking is the tendency to believe that right or wrong, or any pair of opposites being debated or studied, are totally inversely proportionate. Oh, and that's come up too. In other words, the truth is often not in the middle between two positions. Like on climate change, there's a very, well, with Trump and masks or whatever, it's not yes masks, no masks. That would be the tendency to believe that arguments or dialectics tend to be all, it kind of trails off. Maybe this is not data itself necessarily, but rather interpretation of data. Yeah, so in other words, data, if you think everything is an opinion,
But
which I
also,
think gets at your point too.
but the interpretation of data, one of my best students was looking at health inequities and with vision care. And it's like, you get your funding and it's like a 1 to 5 year grant, and a 1 to 2 year grant. But the thing is, if you're really trying to understand this, the data has to go out for a longer time frame. So this is where it's not an either or. You really want that longitudinal and that ability to say, let's build upon other stuff. And I like that the way he's or this person is identifying, kind of, it's not an either or, but it's also how to challenge it, not throw it apart, but just try to make it strengthen.
And that's what some call metadata,
Right,
the
right,
data on how data come to
right,
be.
right. But
Yeah.
it's hard to get money for that if you're trying to get a grant. You don't want to just say,
Oh,
I'm
yeah. Well, reanalysis, data quality, all those
right,
things that are
right,
important are really hard to sustain because everyone, you don't get
right,
tenure
right,
for reassessing someone else's data.
right,
And
right.
that has to be where this open peer review we have online can ultimately, with some practice, so that the audience can get the sense of what is a credibility index,
Yeah,
including in interpreters of data, there's a potential to have that drive things forward. And
Yeah.
I think overall, the internet still has that capacity.
Oh, it's
There's so many bad examples of everything being co-opted, and the misinformation and disinformation both are extraordinarily powerful,
yeah.
problematic realities right now.
But it's for me trying to get them, like, I'm just like, do it through the library reference system or whatever. So it's like, at least you have some type of a vetted source.
Right.
So that's the hard thing, because you want to make it, and that's what's nice about college students. They have access to a lot of, sources that are, peer reviewed or whatever. At least you can have that and then kind of go run through it. So how do we do that? Keep it open, but also have it be rigorous.
Right. Well, kind of like Wikipedia.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I know there are people working on this. Their names are not coming. Oh, here we go. Wikidata.
Oh, I love Wikidata. Yeah. Yeah.
Like, is that moving things in the direction you're thinking about?
Yes. And again, it's so fun to talk to you, but I have to deal with, 20-year-olds, and they kind of have learned a lot. They're seniors in college. They are knowledgeable, but at the same time, they don't know that much. When you talk about Wikidata and stuff, I mean, they're not grad students. So I'm not trying to put anyone off, but there is this wonderful, a lot of knowledge that's out there that you want to build upon, rather than, start from zero each time.
Yeah. Well, maybe this is on the to-do list here. Like, I'd like to poke around to see if we could actually do a focus session on this,
Yeah. Oh,
including with people at Columbia grappling with the same questions. That this feels so. If you, when we're done, if you
yeah.
could just type up
I will
that
probably type up.
what
Man,
that vision is
have you ever heard of the reference source Zotero?
of what?
Zotero. It's a library reference source.
No.
Okay. Well, it's just now being used as a way, Zotero. And the idea about it is it's just trying to broaden how you pull together information. It's kind of a librarian instead of RefWorks or whatever. But the idea is that, I can't keep up to date. Your expertise is fabulous, and I want to have kind of a group of different people so that I can use it. We can have this shared reference library that's built upon by anyone. It's open, but it's also refereed by people that have experience.
Oh, well, that's really interesting. And you bring to mind a couple of people here too. Ophelia Mangan, who's has a background in learning design, educational design, and
Yeah.
she also library and resources. She would know in a heartbeat some people to talk to about this.
Yeah. Cool. I'll let you go on, but
No, we're kind of at the end of the first.
Okay.
I want to keep this to an hour, but this was great. I want to try this open door thing. So where did you see the link? Was it on Twitter or Facebook?
Literally, I was procrastinating. I was doing my work. I went to Twitter and I saw it. And I just clicked, and suddenly I was on live. So I'm sorry, my office is a mess.
No, well, we're all working on that.
It's wonderful. It's wonderful, and I hope you'll keep doing it.
So maybe, all right. So let's close by you just
Yes.
quickly articulating that vision. Like, so what is the thing you're looking for? That the MacGuffin, as Hitchcock put it in a screenplay, is that thing.
So what's so exciting for me is both open source, but the wisdom of crowds and the experience that you have. You have been working, interviewing, done research, and been exposed for decades. And I want to build upon that, but also have a fresh face as I try to mentor undergrads who are undertaking independent research, that they need to get a kind of up to speed of kind of what we've done before. You need to know, what other people have tried. Did it work? Didn't it work? What are best practices? And then build upon it. So that's what I would like.
That's awesome. That's a great summary too. I think that's very that encapsulates a vision I'm sure others will embrace and grab onto. So let's count on trying to do a follow-up session soon, before the fall, before everyone's freaking out completely.
Oh, well, my fall is August.
I know. So
these are starting early.
So, and again, this is Laura Reed, who's at University of Massachusetts Amherst, who just stumbled into our thriving online open door.
Yeah.
And more of you can do the same. If you hold on just 1 second, I'm going to read my little boilerplate summary of what this is that we're doing here. Give me 1 second.
No worries.
And thank you again.
Yeah.
For being the prototype.
Yeah.
Hold on. So you've been watching for an hour, an experimental hour here. This is number 4 of this weekly Monday Thriving Online session, trying to develop and propagate tools and techniques for navigating the information landscape that so often feels confounding, confusing, exasperating, distracting. I'm Andy Revkin from the Earth Institute at Columbia University. Today's impromptu guest is Laura Reed from UMass Amherst, and this is part of Sustain What. Sustain What is a global online conversation identifying solutions to the complicated, shape-shifting, and epic challenges of humanity's great acceleration. A prime focus is making sense of and getting the most out of the planet's fast-forward information environment. It's the one Earth system changing faster than the actual environment. And boy, is it a noisy, loud, cantankerous one these days. This webcast is produced as part of my work building Columbia University's new Earth Institute initiative on communication and sustainability. As soon as we're done here, share the link you've been watching on with friends and circles far and wide. Get in touch with ideas. See the scrolling bar at the bottom for my info. And thanks again. On Wednesday, we're doing one on readiness with the National Center for Disaster Preparedness Director here at Columbia University, with Alice Hill, who's a former National Security Council member and now at the Council on Foreign Relations, with Rod Schoonover, who's a national intelligence analyst, who's now just a brilliant guy when it comes to pandemic readiness, and Judith Matloff from the journalism school at Columbia, who wrote a book called How to Drag a Body, sort of practical tips for emergency situations. Thank you, Laura, so much for being here. Thank you to everyone who's been watching today.
Excellent. Take care.
Right. Bye.
Bye.